tithing. Now, there's something that a lot of Christians are really uncomfortable talking about. Why? Well, they're afraid to talk about it because religious people are so over the top with beating them down with, you better tithe. If you don't tithe, you're going to be cursed. God's going to get you. He's not going to bless you, and on it goes. But here's the interesting thing. You're not going to find that teaching in the new covenant. It's just not there. And you start talking about this tithing stuff, and I'm telling you, Christians the claws come out, the anger, they start fighting and disowning you and calling you a heretic and so forth and so on. So why would I even want to take the time to make a video like this? Because I know the backlash that comes behind it. Well, I'm doing this because I want to take a few minutes to free people from bondage. You see, I believe there are a lot of good Christians that they want to honor God. I mean, if they believe that we are called to tithe, that God has commanded us to tithe, and if we don't do it, we're going to be cursed or we're going to be somehow missing out on some blessings from God, well, then any Christian in their right mind is going to tithe. We're going to do whatever we believe God has commanded us to do. So, has God commanded us to tithe? We're going to go over these verses that continue to be pulled up over and over again. And what is my goal? What is my motive? My heart is very simple, that you will be able to give freely from the heart. And you know what, Christian? Maybe you find yourself struggling. Times are tough. You're about to have your electricity cut off. And maybe for you, it looks like 2%. Maybe it looks like nothing. Hey, maybe you're super blessed and it looks like 20%. But whatever it is, that it's coming from the heart, but it's not out of some religious guilt trip that is coming from so many churches and so many church leaders that we don't know what to decide. But again, I know you want to do right, so I'm going to try to at least touch on some of these verses, and then you decide in your heart whether you should be mandated to give 10% or not. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about all of the verses, all the chapters that are in the epistles. And we're going to name them all the chapters in the epistles that even mention tithing. Are you ready? Here it comes. Hebrews chapter 7. That's it. Hebrews chapter 7. Now, if tithing is so critically important, wouldn't you think that at least Paul, that somewhere through all of the epistles, we would be hearing a lot on tithing? And we're going to talk about Hebrews chapter 7 too. You're going to find that you're free to give from the heart, not under compulsion. So Hebrews is mentioned one time, or maybe twice in Hebrews chapter 7. And then it's only really brought up at one time from Jesus himself when he's talking to the Pharisees. And we're going to talk about that in a minute too. And it's the, we'll table that and we'll get right back to it. So let's begin with this. I want to start with Hebrews chapter 7, verses 4 to 12. Notice this. He says, now I want you to see what's happening here. Matter of fact, let me do a spoiler alert. So what's going on here in Hebrews chapter 7? What's really going on, so you can think it through as I go through the verses, is, listen, we are free from law. We are under grace. And there's this continual comparison all through the book of Hebrews. It's being presented to Jewish people. And the idea is, hey, look, the angels brought in the law, right? And Jesus brought in the new covenant. And then the writers essentially were saying, so who's greater? And what's the point? Well, if Jesus is greater than angels, well, if the angels ordained the law and Jesus ordained the new covenant, well, who's greater? Well, Jesus Christ is, obviously. And there's a lot of these comparisons. We see this very same thing in Hebrews chapter 7, the only chapter where tithing is even brought up in the epistles. And what you're going to see is a comparison. Hey, the comparison will tie into this. Who's greater, the law or Jesus? And in the end, we make a decision. Will I grab onto the new covenant or the old covenant? So, here it is. It starts out with this. Chapter 7, Hebrews, verse 4, it says, now observe how great this man was. Now, who is this man? This man is Melchizedek. Not talking about Abraham, right? So, observe how great this man was, to whom Abraham, the patriarch, gave a tenth. So we might stop right there. See, there it is. Look, nobody's arguing that in the Old Testament people didn't tithe. Yes, people did tithe in the Old Testament. I think we can all agree on that. So here it is. He says, Abraham the patriarch gave a tenth of the choicest of spoils. Let's stop right there for a second. Let's just say we just went by verse 4. Well, how many times did Abraham tithe in the Old Testament that we know of? One time. Did we see a commandment when Abraham tithed that one time? No, we sure didn't. And was Abraham tithing of his own money? No. He was tithing from the spoils of war. So if we're going to use this as our guide for giving, well, then we are going to give one time, and it's not going to be ours. It's going to be, we're going to run out and have a war. We're going to take somebody else's stuff, and then we will leave 10% of that in the church altar, and they can do whatever they want with it. But that's not what's really going on here now, is it? So let's continue with verse 5. And those, indeed, of the sons of Levi. Who's Levi? Levi is essentially the leader of the Levitical priesthood, right? The law, where the law comes in. It's the Levitical priesthood who ties into this. Now, I want you to notice, Levi brings in the law, okay? Jesus brings in the new covenant. So follow me very, very carefully here. Indeed, those who were the sons of Levi who received the priest's office have, now notice, the commandment in the law to collect a tenth from the people. So let's stop there. We now see that tithing is a commandment of the law. So if you're free from the law, no longer under the law, then why are we talking about, but you're required to tithe? And some would say, well, why would we give less under law than we do under grace? And that's really the equivalent of saying, well, why not rest even harder on the Sabbath? Don't even lift a finger up on the Sabbath, because why would we rest less on the Sabbath than under law, under grace, than under law? That's like saying essentially that, hey, once you got released from law and placed under grace, well, the commandments got tougher. I mean, the requirements to fulfill and please God actually got tougher. So let me just lay that out. This is clearly being told that it's a law. And we'll see in a minute, Jesus also said it was a law. A lot of people used to say, well, no, there were examples of tithing long before the law came in. Well, the bottom line is this. It's a law. So it says, commandment in the law to collect a tenth from the people, that is from their brethren, although these are descended from Abraham. Now catch this. I want you to see what the writer of Hebrews is trying to teach us. Abraham, right? The Levites are, if you will, descendants from Abraham. So Abraham is the guy, he's at the focal point in the story, him and Melchizedek. What we're going to see is Levi, the Levitical priesthood, the priest of the law. Well, he's in the loins. You know what that means, of Abraham. He's yet to be born, but down through Abraham's lineage, the law, the Levites, Levi shall be born. So keep that in mind. There's a comparison going to be made here. He says, although these are descended from Abraham, but the one whose genealogy is not traced, who could that be referring to? From them collected a tenth from Abraham. So this person whose genealogy is not traced, we learned that he was without mother, without father. This is Melchizedek. Now, is it the Christ himself? Is it a picture of Christ? I don't know, but we know exactly where the writer's going here. He says, but the one whose genealogy is not traced from them, well, he collected a tenth from Abraham. Do you see something going on here? You see the comparison? Abraham, who Levi is going to be born through, ultimately the priest of the law, the high priest of the law, he's paying respect to Melchizedek, Christ-like. The picture is, well, who's greater? It's not about you better give. We're not going to see a single verse in here, so therefore you too need to be giving a tithe. That is not what's going on here. The picture here is who's paying respect to who? Who's greater? And ultimately the point, just like all through Hebrews, is who's greater, the new covenant or the law? So it says, but the one whose genealogy is not traced, from them collected a tenth from Abraham, and blessed the one who had the promises. But without any dispute, The lesser, who's the lesser? Abraham, the law. The lesser blessed the greater, Melchizedek, right? So in this case, mortal men receive tithes. But in that case, one receives them of whom it is witnessed that he lives on. And so to speak, through Abraham, here it comes, even Levi, who received tithes, paid tithes. For he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. Here it comes. Continue the following. Verse 11. Now if perfection through the Levitical priesthood, for on the basis of it people received the law, what further need was there for another priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek, and not to be designated to the order of Aaron? Now here's the final takeaway too. What is your point, writer? Verse 12, for when the priesthood is changed, of necessity there takes place a change of law also. We had an old covenant. We now have a new covenant. We have a new priest. Jesus wasn't even from the lineage of Levi, so he's not even qualified to be a priest under the law. But when we have a new priest, we have a change of law. And the whole point, and what's that change of law, by the way? A new command I give you. A new one, not adding on to Moses 101, 1.2, if you will. It's a new command I give you. Love others as I have loved you. Believe in the Son. This is the new commandment. It's a new covenant. By grace you've been saved. And again, what's the whole point of that story? Is Melchizedek is greater than Abraham. Melchizedek is a Christ-like person, or if not the Christ, and Levi is going to come through the lineage of Abraham. And Abraham and the Jewish people would have got this. What in the world is Abraham giving a tithe to this dude? Because it comes up in Genesis, and we'll read that in a minute. And it's just just happens. There's like 2 or 3 verses dedicated to this, and then he disappears. So of course the Jewish people would have got it. They would have said, "What in the world was Abraham giving this money, this tithe, to Melchizedek?" Well, again, we've just discovered that Levi, who will be the priest of the law, will come through Abraham's loins. And the idea is that Abraham, hence Levi, is paying respect to another priest. Who's greater, Jesus or Levi? Melchizedek, Abraham, and on it goes. And the point is, so then which covenant is greater? Which one should you hold on to? And that's what that's the only time this comes up in the epistles. Not once did you see, you better tithe, therefore, okay? So then we get into Jesus' account, okay? This is short. In Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we'll see a short account of this. Let's use Matthew chapter 23, verses 23 and 24. You know, it sounds, well, Jesus said to tithe. Well, let's see if we want to give by the standards of this presentation of tithing that oftentimes is being taught at the church. It says, Jesus says this, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites." Now, apparently, Jesus thinks they're a bunch of idiots here. What does he say? They're actually tithing, if you will, right? But Jesus says, you're a hypocrite. He says, "For you tithe," now listen very carefully, "mint and dill and cumin." Now, let's be very clear. These are spices. This is not money. And nobody should be saying, well, yeah, there wasn't money. There was money. Remember, Jesus said to the Roman government, "Give Caesar what is Caesar's," talking about their coins, right? So if this is the standard of giving, then I'm going to go out in my backyard and I'm going to plant some spices and I'll tithe 100% of it. I'll give it all, okay? If that's the standard of giving. If we're going to quote these passages as the standard of giving, then let's stick with them. So he says this, "For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, but you've neglected the weightier matters of the law." What did Jesus just say? He's just reminded us that tithing is a matter of the law. You are free from the law. You are no longer under the law. Anyone under the law is under a curse. That means you're also free from the law of tithing. Though if you're not a Jewish person, you were never even given the law, though you may be a law to yourself. So he says, you've neglected the weightier matters of the law. So apparently there are less weightier matters of the law. What's he referring to? Tithing was considered a lesser matter of the law. He says, you've ignored the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting others. You blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. So apparently Jesus, boy, he's really giving these guys the third degree. You're tithing mint and spices, not money, very clear, not money, but you're ignoring the things that are far more important in the law. Essentially, it sums up to this: love. And that's what Christ really cares about, is love. Again, you're not going to find a single commandment for Christians to tithe. It's just not in there. Yet we are being beat down over and over again. You better tithe. You better give money or else. So then there's the next one. I love this one. Are you robbing God? Man, you talk about killing a Christian who loves God and wants to honor God, but then they pull out this verse that says, are you robbing God? Well, I don't want to rob God. You don't want to rob God. And the implication is, if you're not giving 10% of your paycheck at the local church, well, you're robbing God. You're a thief. You're a horrible person, and God's disgusted with you. Well, let's take a little peek at that. This comes from Malachi, chapter 3, verses 8 through 10. You know, it's the whole pitch. Don't be robbing God. If you'll just, have faith, fellow Christian, and just write that check week after week after week after week. Never, ever give up. No matter how far behind on bills you are, no matter how much you're struggling, no matter what obligations you have, you just do it. God will open up the heavens. And you know what? That sounds good, but that's not what God is promising. These are Jewish people under law. And again, there's a reason you don't see it under the new covenant, because it doesn't apply to you or any other Christian. So let's start. It's Malachi chapter 3, verses 8 through 10. It says, will a man rob God? You are robbing me, yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse. Now, imagine God's cursing us. Yeah, your sins and lawless deeds I remember no more. I paid for your sins. As far as the west and the east, I've taken them away. But if you don't tithe, all the bets off. You no more. I'm going to curse you. I'm not going to bless you. In fact, you can expect to experience wrath. It just doesn't line up. It's not the new covenant message. He says in tithes and offerings, verse 9, he says, you are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Now you got to understand something. These priests at this time, they didn't have jobs. They didn't have 401ks and life insurance policies and a revenue stream coming in. This was the priest's only income. And God set up a system through the tithe system, if you will, a tax system, that would allow these people to be taken care of as they should be, right? But your pastor is getting paid, as is mine. So he goes on to say, now let's notice the tithe. If this is the standard of giving, I want you to notice this. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. Stop. What is a storehouse? It is not a bank. It is not a place where money is kept. No, it is food. Just like we saw the spices when Jesus was talking to the Pharisees and the scribes. It's food. So if this is the standard, I'm happy to go grab 10% of my food out of the pantry and bring it to the local church. It says, you are cursed with a curse. You're robbing me, the whole nation. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. And I quote, so that there may be food in my house. And test me on this, me now on this, says the Lord, if I will not open the heavens, if I will not open the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing for you until it overflows. Guys, that's great. And I'm going to tell you right now, I have had times in my life where I have struggled and I didn't give any tithe at all. Or I gave, but I didn't give a tithe of 10%. Didn't feel necessary. And I was never cursed. I continued to grow financially and eventually got to a point where I could tithe. And there was a period of time where I wouldn't even give 10%. Never. We just would not give 10%. And I continued to make more and more money. Now, I wasn't being blessed because I wasn't giving. I'm just saying I wasn't being cursed. And then as I grew in my relationship with Christ, from the heart I wanted to give, not out of law, not out of some preacher up there telling me, you better, God's going to get you. Are you robbing God? No, I started to give because I wanted to. So again, what will I say about Abraham? How many times did he tithe? One time. He tithed from the spoils of war, okay? Spoils of war. He was never commanded to do it. And we are taking these verses and we are building hour-long sermons to guilt Christians into writing that 10% check, lest you scare them to death that somehow God might turn his back on them. And I got to be honest with you, friends, it's a horrible thing. And I have challenged person after person after person, say, if this is true, if we are commanded as Christians to tithe, then why can't you show me one verse that unequivocally says this is what we're called to do? If it's that important, why would it be completely absent in the epistles and only talked about once by Jesus? And in the context, he's slamming the ones who are tithing and telling them they're avoiding more important matters of the law. So we'll close with this. We're at Genesis. This is where Abraham's story comes up. Just want to make sure you know it. Wow, it's like 3 verses. Genesis chapter 14, verses 17 to 20. It says there, after his return from the defeat I'll probably chop this one up, of Timor Lamor, and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Sheva, that is the king's valley, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of God Most High. He blessed him and he said, Blessed be Abraham of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered you from your enemies at hand. He gave them 1/10 of all. That's the whole story. That's it. And it just ends right there. And the Jewish people would have said, I don't get it. What in the world is going on here? Why did Abraham give this money? And again, Hebrews gives us the answer to that. Hebrews tells us, oh, he's actually paying respects. He's essentially, through his seed will come the law. And he's actually paying respects to Melchizedek, who was without mother. If you read later in Hebrews, we see he's without mother, without father, without genealogy, without beginning or end. And the idea is, who's greater, guys? Is it Levi or Abraham, or is it Jesus Christ? Melchizedek, if you will, in this case. Who's greater? And if he's greater, if Jesus is greater, then hey, Jewish people, you need to let go of the law, including the law of tithing, and grab on to the law of grace, Jesus Christ crucified. Again, nowhere in the Bible, we're going to close with this, you're not going to find anywhere in the Bible where we're commanded to tithe. It's just not there, Christians. We see that Abraham gave one time, it's from spoils of war. So then we end up with this question. Well, why tithe? Let me reframe that. Then why give? Why give any money? Why not give $10, $2, $3? Listen, the Bible does tell us to give. There are many reasons to give, and the Bible tells us to give from the heart. Give from our abundance. Don't give under compulsion. We need to give where there's need. Why would I give anything to the church? By the way, sometimes I'll give all of my desire given to the church. Sometimes I'll give some to the church, and maybe another time to a homeless person or to a sick child or a family in need. There is no rule. I give from the heart. I give to advance godly needs, if you will. But why would I give at the church? Because I want to see the gospel message grow. But the church is essentially saying you can't trust your heart. Not all churches, by the way. Many churches, though. You can't trust your heart. And if we don't freak you out and scare the daylights out of you, you won't give anything. If you look at research, you're going to find most people are not tithing. They're just not doing it. Why? Because you get a guy in the church and he says, I can't give 10%, I'm freaked out, and they just don't have it. So rather than give maybe 5%, which they do have, they feel like, well, God's going to be disgusted with me anyway. What's the point? 1%, 5%. So we pick out $1 or $5, we hide it in the envelope, and we just sort of push it through so we can sort of please the guy next to us. But what if the church finally believe this. You can trust your heart that if the church would let people give freely, if their message was, listen, give what your heart is leading you to do. Here's why we need it. We want to advance the gospel. We want to bring people to Jesus Christ. We want to go on mission trips. We want to do these things. And if you feel led to give $20, $100, $1,000, whatever your heart feels led to give. I promise you, if we would let people give from the heart, you might see giving go up, just fly through the roof in churches. But right now, there's so much guilt and condemnation because not everyone has the financial means to give 10%. Yes, some of that may be because we live in a country where we're spending too much on new cars or houses, and we do tend to have some absurd lifestyles. I'm not defending that, but what I am saying is this. You're free to give. And by the way, the gospel should work the same here as it does for any other Christian around the world. And if that message, if only you tithe, you put in your quarters and out come the blessings, right? If that's how it worked, that gospel should work anywhere. And why don't we see preachers hanging out in these third world countries going, you guys know what's wrong with you? You guys are over there, you're hungry, your homes have no electric or no water. It's just rough. You got no shoes on your feet because we come over here and we give you guys some rice and you don't take 10% of that and give it right back to us. We need that 10% back at the church. If you would just do that, you wouldn't be struggling. And you know what? That's not the gospel. And I would never say that to them. So I'm closing with this again. Maybe you don't have anything to give. You're free. You're free. Maybe you can give 10%. Great. Maybe you can only give 5%. Great. Maybe you've been blessed beyond measure and you can give 20%. That's great too. The point is, let the giving come from here. Don't let the giving come from fear and condemnation, because that is not what God has called us to do. So thank you for 27 minutes of your time. I hope for some of you at least, you've gotten a new view of tithing. Feel free to share your comments. God bless you.